Shavua Tov, in the Haggadah of Pesach, there's a delightful song which we love to sing, Dayenu. And in Dayenu there is a passage which is very puzzling. It says, Ilu kerevanu lifnei har Sinai. If God had brought us to close to Mount Sinai, velo natan lanu et Torah, and hadn't given us the Torah, Dayenu, it would have been enough for us. Really? To bring us to Mount Sinai and not give us the Torah? What is this, a tour? We're having a tour of the desert? That's enough for us? What is the fact that we were by Har Sinai enough for us? The whole point of getting there was to get the Torah. So what does that exactly mean? So many of the commentaries point out that it says in the parsha that which we just read, Yitro, that the people, he camped next to the mountain. Vayichan sham neged har. He camped next to the mountain. He is the singular. We're talking about the whole nation there, which is a couple of million probably. So why does the Torah use the phrase he, the singular, to teach us that they were as if they were one person with one heart? They had tremendous amount of unity, and on that we say Dayenu. That was an accomplishment, that unity was an accomplishment. Okay, that's good, but that doesn't have to be at Mount Sinai. That could have been anywhere. So I think we need to ask a little more. Let's take a look at the story. Some elements of the story of the giving of the Torah are surprising. One of them is that the Torah says the whole people saw the thunder and the lightning. In other words, they saw things that normally are just heard, and they also heard things that are normally just seen. Their senses were, I don't know if you'd say confused, but their senses were enhanced, so they could see that which is normally only audible, and they heard that which is normally only visual. Why was that miracle necessary? An even more puzzling thing is something the rabbis point out, that the verse says that the people stood at the foot of the mountain, betachti tahar, which means at the bottom of the mountain. And the rabbis say it wasn't just at the foot of the mountain, it was actually under the mountain, that God picked the mountain up, held it over their heads, and says to the people, if you accept the Torah, good. If not, here or there is actually the phrase, there is your burial. In other words, he threatened them that if they don't accept the Torah, he's going to basically drop the mountain on them. Now that's a very puzzling thing. Didn't the people say, when Moses was talking to them, whatever God said, we will do? They accepted the Torah. They were willing to do it. They did it with a smile and with a pleasant attitude. So why does God need to threaten them that if they don't accept the Torah, there they shall be buried? That's very strange. In order to answer this, we need to look at the date when the Torah was given, because therein lies a hint. The Torah was given, according to one opinion in the Talmud, on the 6th day of Sivan, that after a little bit of back and forth between Moses and God, Moses delivers the message to the people that they have to prepare themselves for 2 days. That's what God told him to say. Prepare yourselves for 2 days, and then on the 3rd day you will receive the Torah. That would come out to be the preparation on the 4th and the 5th of Sivan, and the receiving of the Torah on the 6th of Sivan. But there's another rabbi who says, no. Moses added a day on his own account. He says to the people, be prepared for the 3rd day, which could also mean be preparing yourselves for 3 days, and then on the 4th day, that would imply, that's when you'll receive the Torah, and that would have been the 7th of Sivan. So that rabbi says they received it on the 7th of Sivan, and Moses added an extra day of preparation. Now this, if you run for example, a dentist office appointment schedule, this will create a problem. If you made an appointment for someone on the 6th day of the month, and then they show up on the 7th day of the month and say, here I am, you say to them, that's nice, you're here, but the doctor isn't. He was here yesterday, or she was here yesterday. So it doesn't work. How can Moses change the day on his own without, isn't God the one giving the Torah? So, well, the Maharal of Prague comes to our rescue, and he says that what happened was there were 2 significant earth-shaking events that had to happen, and each of them deserved its own day. One of them was that the divine God is giving his Torah to flesh and blood. That's so tremendous. That has to be on its own day. And that's the matan, the giving of the Torah. And that's what God did on the 6th of Sivan. But, says the Maharal, the fact that flesh and blood, human beings, can receive the divine Torah is also so significant. It has to have its own special day. So therefore Moses didn't want it to be on the same day when God gave it. That would be diluting the grandeur of the fact that God is giving his Torah to human beings. So therefore he pushed it off that on the 7th day of the month, then the Jewish people will receive the Torah. So in other words, according to the Maharal, Moses didn't change God's schedule at all. God gave the Torah on the 6th of Sivan. Moses simply changed the arrival date, the delivery date, if you will, to be the next day, which already has within it a very lovely idea that God gave the Torah on the 6th of Sivan, and it's there waiting. And to this very day, anyone who wishes to go up spiritually to the top of the mountain and receive the Torah can do so. It's still there. The rabbis in the tractate of Avot constantly talk about how if people study Torah, if you have 10 people studying Torah, 5 people studying Torah, that the divine presence is there, God is with them. So that may be the same concept. And that's perhaps why the Torah never says that the festival of Shavuot is because of the giving of the Torah. That's already a rabbinical addition, but the Torah itself never says it. Why? Because you can't say that one specific day was when God gave the Torah. The Torah is now available every single day throughout eternity, and all we need to do is spiritually climb that mountain and to receive it. That's on the side. Now, I like to explain this change that Moshe made. Why did he add an extra day? Because he wanted the people to accept and receive the Torah on a higher level. In a prayer that we recite in the synagogue when there is a minyan present, there are the verses of sanctification of God's name, Kedushah. And there are 2 main verses that we say. The first one is Kadosh, 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 Holy, 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 the Lord of hosts. His glory fills the universe. And the second one, said by the slightly lower angels, is Baruch Kvod Hashem Imkomo, blessed is the honor of God from his place. Now, there's a difference between those 2 verses. There are a couple of differences. One of them is the number of words before the name of God is mentioned. In the latter verse, we have 2 words, Baruch Kavod, and then the third word is the name of God, Hashem, Mimakomo, from his place. In other words, when you have 2 levels of preparation, as these lower angels do, then you can perceive of God, but you can perceive of God in a specific place, not all over, not throughout creation. Mimakomo, from his place. But the higher angels, they have a higher perception of God. They have 3 levels of preparation. They say 3 words before they come to God's name. Kadosh, holy, Kadosh, holy, Kadosh, holy, the 3rd time. And then Hashem, Tzvakot, the Lord of hosts. And how do they perceive God? Melo chol haaretz kivodo, his glory fills the entire universe. So there we see a difference, and perhaps this is what Moses was aiming at. If the Israelites would have had just 2 days to prepare, they would have perceived God like the lower angels, Mimakomo, having a specific place. He would have been limited in their perception by geographical or location. But if he adds an extra day of preparation, then they can rise up to the level of the higher angels, and then they can perceive God throughout the universe. And that's what Moses wanted to do, have 3 days of preparation and receive it on the 4th. What do we see from this? Well, we see from this a very important principle that the Torah is not just a book of laws which we must accept. It's not a hobby, God forbid. It's not even the laws of the nation. The acceptance of the Torah requires something much more fundamental. It requires us to become spiritual beings, and Moses wanted to maximize that spiritual potential. And what is the nature of a spiritual person? What is the nature of the spiritual world? That there are no limitations. You can see that which is normally heard. You can hear that which is normally seen only. Your perception of the world, there is no limit of distance or time. The Spirit is eternal. The Spirit connects to everything. And whenever there is separation, whenever there is hatred, it is because people have become not spiritual. They become more involved in their physical existence. In the story of the creation of the world, in the chapter of Bereshit, we have the story of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve, before they ate from the tree of knowledge, they had complete spiritual connection. They viewed themselves as being one person. Adam says when he sees Eve for the first time, Etzem me'atzamai, this is a bone from my bones, basar mibsari, flesh from my flesh. In other words, he felt completely unified with his wife, with Eve. But once they ate from the tree of knowledge, then their physical existence became powerful in their minds and their hearts. And all of a sudden, they became distanced from each other. They no longer were one and the same. They now were two distinct individuals who definitely had a relationship, but they were two distinct individuals, and they became aware of the fact that they were naked. In other words, they became embarrassed in front of each other. And so the cause of division is a connection or a focus on the physical existence, and that is where the trouble comes. So when we receive the Torah, we must become more high, more spiritual. And that is what God is saying to the people. If you accept the Torah, they already agreed to accept the Torah, but perhaps they accepted the Torah as a hobby, God forbid, or even as a set of laws and rules for the nation. That's still not sufficient. That is accepting the Torah from underneath the mountain. And maybe that's why it says, there will be your burial. Why doesn't it say here? Because God is saying, if you accept the Torah like this, it'll work for a while, but that's not, but it will also, as all physical things, it will eventually meet its end. It will meet its limit. If you wish to be eternal, you have to accept the Torah by becoming spiritual people. You have to spiritually be on top of the mountain, and then you will accept the Torah for eternity. Then you will be able to transcend all of those limits. Now, I think that the answer to our original question, what does it mean that had God brought us close to Mount Sinai and not given us the Torah, it would have been enough for us? What do you mean it would have been enough for us? The answer could be very simple, that yes, the answer that people give, that when we arrived at Mount Sinai, we had unity. It says there, Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Dahar, we camped, excuse me, as one person with one heart. In other words, we had the same unity that Adam and Eve had before they ate from the tree of knowledge. That's how powerful that unity was. And the only way that you can achieve unity like that is if you are not physically focused, but spiritually focused. Because spiritual person is a person with no limits and a person who is able to bind completely with his fellow spiritual person. The hatred, the bitterness, all of the stuff that we see too much today in the news, the demonizing and all of that, is all coming from a society that is becoming increasingly focused on its own physical needs and not on its spiritual needs. And that is a serious issue. The more spiritual we become, the more unified we will become. That's just the nature of the way it works. And so therefore, a spiritual nation that is so powerful spiritually, will of necessity receive the Torah. They will need it. They will, if it's not there, if God doesn't give it to them, they're going to go up and they're going to get it and bring it down from heaven, because the spiritual person needs the Torah. And therefore, when we camped there as one person with one heart, that means we were so powerfully spiritual that God did not even need to give us the Torah, Dayenu. So that is our mission, to continue to be spiritual people. It's a day-to-day challenge, but the more we can be spiritual, the more we will be at peace with ourselves, with the people close to us, with everybody, and that is what God really wants us to be. We'll be on top of the mountain, enjoying the beautiful view of a spiritual life. Shavua Tov.